All right, guys. Hey, guys, just about time. Ed, are you pulling up the stream to? Okay, just make sure that you can hear me just fine here. Oh, I thought I did. Oopsie. Uh, it might be slightly delayed. It looks like StreamYard says that it's going. Give it just a second here. Not getting anything. Okay, it's up. All right, cool. And you can hear me okay with whatever, I imagine there's some delay. Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming out for another MISEC Southfield Tech Talk. To start us off, I would like to thank Brown Iron Brew House for hosting us once again. Excellent place to come get burgers, beer, lots of great food here, and a great place to meet up. So today, I will be giving a crash course in Wi-Fi hacking. So before we get too far into it, start us off, you may be asking yourself, who is this man standing before me? My name is Kurt Weber. You may know me as Weird Wired on Discord. I work in IT and security consulting. I've been doing that for roughly a decade now. And I am also on the MISEC leadership board. I'm also an aficionado of obscure references for anyone who caught the title reference there. So the agenda. What we're going to be talking about here, this is not going to be an extremely technical or an extremely hands-on sort of talk. A lot of this is going to be more of the how to get started, some of the types of things that you will see when trying to do Wi-Fi hacking, but we're not going to be going into other wireless protocols either, like we're not going to be touching on Zigbee, Bluetooth, ham, anything like that. And we'll be starting off with recon. So the stuff that, generally speaking, you're probably not going to be getting in trouble for. That's not legal advice. Anything I say here today, you are your own person. You will have to make decisions about what you do, and I cannot be held legally liable for any of this. After we go through some of the reconnaissance type information, we will talk about some various methods of exploitation. And those are the things that can get you in trouble if you start doing them if you don't have permissions to be doing them. After that, I'm going to talk about a few places that you can go in order to learn some of this stuff more in depth, places that are more safe and help you set up those sorts of environments without actually having any troubles. Not like a Delta flight. And towards the end of the presentation, I've got a couple interesting things I ran into that are either a little bit out of scope for what this talk was supposed to be, or that I didn't have as much time to dig into as I would have liked. But considering that the theme is kind of jumping off points and places to get started. They were projects that I think would be great places for anyone who's interested in doing future MISEC talks could probably jump off of. Digging into it from there. So reconnaissance, like I said, generally this is where you're going to be safe. This is going to be your passive information collection. This is the kind of things that can be used both offensively and actually has a lot of defensive applications as well, and even just practical outside of security. When we're getting into what you can actually do with just pure recon alone, first thing, of course, is going to be finding open Wi-Fi. That's the kind of thing that not quite as common anymore, but as we'll get into, and probably one of the more technical parts of this talk, I am going to get into a little bit of data in Wi-Fi encryption. There are still open networks out there that you can utilize, so that's always handy, as long as you're running a VPN if you're doing anything important. But most of the time, as long as you're not just throwing passwords around or trying to do like your banking or your crypto stuff on a public open Wi-Fi, probably going to be okay. Along with that is looking for interference. This is one of those more practical things I was talking about. The tools that I'm going to talk about, and a lot of the more proprietary ones, will generally not only give you the SSID of the network and like the strength and everything, but it will also give you the channels. So you can kind of use that to determine what channels are stronger in your area, are used more commonly in your area, to choose a channel that's not, in order to prevent various forms of interference. So you can learn what's being used around you. MAC addresses. While most mobile devices nowadays will automatically just cycle out of MAC addresses, and savvy users are probably going to be spoofing their MAC address. If you're looking at like just basic IoT stuff or a lot of standard like laptops and things, you can just, using the MAC address, you can get the make and model of the various devices around you and learn what's in use in your area. Along with that, mapping data. Talk a little bit more about war driving specifically later, but it's a very fun hobby that a lot of people like to do, is just kind of mapping the area, figuring out what's out there, and delving deeper into that is research. So for example, there was a really great MISEC Con talk a handful of years ago where these two guys were driving up and down, I believe it was Woodward. They did driving, and then they did actually private flight over, because one of them had a pilot's license to determine like what kinds of information they could collect, the differences and everything like that. And while it wasn't a talk with a ton of practical applications for your average person, it was a very fun talk. Tools of the trade. A lot of free and open source options. Kismet's probably going to be your big one as far as just general use. That's going to pretty much be stuck to your standard workstation. They technically have an Android application that they've developed, but it was never actually finished, and it is many years old. So you're going to have to put a lot of effort if you want to get Kismet working on your phone. Weigel, on the other hand, is a much more active project. They have an available app. I know it's on Android for sure. I would be shocked if it's not on iPhone. And you can just download the app, pull it up, and it'll start collecting Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, and you can upload it to their maps. They are a great resource if you are trying to do any research involving like wireless technologies in your area or in other areas. I love Weigel. Along with that, when it comes to actually doing the work, any sort of wireless adapter, you can put them in monitoring mode. You can get real cheap, you can get real expensive. If you're trying to do it from a laptop, you're probably not going to want to use your primary wireless card. Usually it's better to just go get a dirt cheap one and see what you can pick up with that. So that way you can still be connected to the internet at the same time you're monitoring. Then also, if you really want to get fancy, you could get into software-defined radio. That is an area that I have only begun to scratch the surface on. I bought myself a real cheap one, and I've had a lot of fun picking up random radio signals in my area. That could be a whole talk of its own. But most SDRs can also pick up within the Wi-Fi range, and you can do all sorts of fun things with those. So getting involved. The primary thing most people are going to think about when they're talking about pure recon activities with Wi-Fi is going to be war driving, or your other variants if you really want to get nitpicky about war biking and war walking and war flying, like I talked about a minute ago. And that's just kind of going out there doing the mapping. A lot of people nowadays will use that to share that data, like with Weigel and other such organizations. But if you're just going around to try to figure out what's around your area, sometimes it's kind of fun to see like whatever goofy names your neighbors have or what types of devices they're actually connecting with. And as long as you don't actually muck with their stuff, you're probably going to stay legal, or at least nobody's going to know because you're not sending anything out into the world. And then fox hunting. This is something that I learned about through DEF CON. They have a fox hunting competition that is done by the Ham Radio Village, and I believe the RF Village is involved in that a lot. And while taking a look at that, they kind of describe it as finding the exact location of wireless devices within the last mile to the last few feet. So a lot of places, mostly, the biggest one I know of is DEF CON, will have CTFs that will have like a wireless component where you'll have to find the location, maybe do like a challenge with it. Sometimes they're stationary, sometimes they're moving, a lot of variance in there. Along with that, I ran into amateur radio direction finding, which generally is a little bit more ham radio focused. But I did find some Wi-Fi instances of this that I thought were worth talking about. And this is kind of just an alternate name for fox hunting, where if you're doing like the larger scale, like the orienteering stuff, you're going to be starting to deal with like ham radio and like really big competitions where you're outside with your radio trying to find these devices as a team in a competition. But that just seemed like a very interesting way to try to learn more about wireless signals that I thought was worth mentioning here. All right, so exploitation. Do not do this on an airplane. As anyone who has been keeping up with local news, well, not local news, but recent news, I should say, and I guess for anyone who happens to stumble upon this video in the way future, DEF CON recently passed, and there was a few script kiddies who were on a Delta flight, and they decided that it was smart to de-off attack everyone on the airplane and set up a wireless network of their own in an attempt to phish everyone on the plane. This caused the plane to be landed early, and these people had to go and talk to people in black suits. As far as I'm aware, it's still very much an ongoing, developing story, but it's most likely just some very excited and kids who weren't thinking things through very well, deciding to play with their cool new toy in a place they really shouldn't have been. Don't do that, unless you really, really want to go talk to the feds. So along with that, as an extension, make sure you have permission. Ideally, you should be doing this within your own devices, or if you have a group you're doing this for, that you have a very strict idea of who you're doing it for, and like allow list everything. As someone who has done a little bit of ethical hacking and has seen what happens when boundaries accidentally get crossed, usually people are relatively in good graces as long as you handle it with proper accountability and grace, but not everyone treats it well. So you want to avoid that as much as you possibly can. And I don't think you're going to get away with Claude did it. So encryption. As I already mentioned, this is probably going to be about the most technical propeller hat portion of the talk. So the data in the table there, that was pulled from Weigel's website. This is a percentage graph. Hopefully it's kind of viewable for the people in the back. That it goes from, it talks about just the generic encrypted, decrypted, unknown. All of those should add up to 100% if you really want to sit there and do the math. Those numbers specifically in the top right, well, not top right, but the further right side of the screen. One sec. Those are some of the more recent. I believe it actually does give the date selected. Yeah, right at the top. It was 7/04. So July 4th was the day that data specifically is from. But as you can see, there's not much beyond that. So the numbers aren't going to change all that much. This data goes back like 20, 30 years. If you notice, the red section is unencrypted Wi-Fi. That drops pretty heavily, especially after 2010. The encrypted section, there's just the general, and then there's the subsections. Those should add up to whatever the encrypted section is for that bit. So the first one I want to talk about is wired equivalent privacy. Wired equivalent protection, WEP, which is by far the oldest. And it was ratified by the Wi-Fi Alliance in the future year of 1997. And it still exists, and that is a problem. It is comically easy to exploit. You might as well not have an encrypted network. It's basically like it's like a master lock for anyone who knows lockpicking. It's basically just a cheap master lock. After that, in 2003, the WPA, or Wi-Fi Protected Access, was ratified, and WPA was much better. It used temporal key integrity protocol, which basically every single packet has its own security key. But unfortunately, it was found that that still had a ton of problems. So not even, like a year later, WPA2 came out, which WPA2 uses a 4-part handshake to make its initial connection, and it is significantly stronger. It has actually been the standard for, was the standard for a very, very long time before WPA3 came out. And as you might be able to notice, it is still the most commonly used. WPA2, one of its biggest flaws is that if you catch that handshake, you can still grab the hash, which, depending on the strength of the password, you can still crack it and then get onto the network. And we'll get a little bit more into that a little bit further down. WPA3 uses a simultaneous authentication of equals, which, long and short, basically translates to you cannot really catch that hash through the initial handshake. Although that was ratified in 2018, it is slowly building prominence. Most newer devices do allow you to set WPA3, and wherever possible, I highly recommend it. Sometimes, especially with like older IoT devices that they're never getting updated, those are only going to support WPA2, so you might just kind of be dead in the water. But a lot of your big attacks against WPA3 are going to be like sideloading attacks, like trying to get into a device first so you can try to get access to the data through the device as they make the connection, or trying to do downgrade attacks. There are also known DOS attacks that you can do against it as well. But it is significantly stronger than all of its predecessors. I'm sorry, you had a question? So I guess for the microphone, how is WIGO collecting all of the SSID data? Crowdsourcing. So if you download the app, when you have it actively enabled, it is just going to passively collect whatever information you let it, and then it has an upload button. So if you want to contribute to this relatively open source project, you can click that button and send them up the Wi-Fi that you have collected in however long you've had it running. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get, all the internet points. So brute forcing. This is going to be the obvious one, especially big in common with the WPA2 type stuff. You have been listening, or you do some kind of like deauthorization attack against the network, so everybody's forced to disconnect, and then they're forced to reconnect, and you get to see those connections. That's likely what happened on the airplane. So by doing this deauth attack and getting the password, the effectiveness is going to vary a lot as far as your, both off network and just direct live, because this doesn't just have to do with trying to crack the hash offline, but also just hammering away at a network, trying to log in. When doing these kinds of attacks, it's possible that the defender may be able to see it, but as far as I've been able to find, there really isn't a whole lot of great ways to stop it beyond just making sure that you have a really strong password. If someone is really that determined to get into your Wi-Fi network, they're probably going to eventually, but they have to be really, really motivated to go after somebody in particular to really go down that particular route. If for some reason you ever find yourself needing to crack a password or brute force someone like this, be smart about it. Try to know who your target is, especially if it's like a company. More often than not, if you're like, you might be able to find like a whiteboard or a picture on like their Facebook or not Facebook, like LinkedIn or whatever, where they've just got it on a whiteboard. You use the OSINT skills. For anyone who was here for my OSINT talk I gave about a year and a half ago, or anybody who wants to go back to the YouTube and find that video in the live section, it's there for anybody to go and watch. Use those sorts of skills. All right, so MAC address spoofing. kind of goes along with like how not really that easy to stop somebody, and goes along with how I was talking about trying to make sure, like trying to know what devices are doing the attacking. MAC address filtering on the whole is not very common in Wi-Fi, especially because in most cases it's very easy to spoof them. As previously mentioned, most mobile devices automatically or have like a privacy setting that will just flip that MAC address not constantly, but very regularly. And if you have admin or root level access to a Windows, Mac, or Linux PC, you can trivially change your MAC address. It's much more common to see that in like an actual hardline plug-in network. But even then, if you've got access to the port and a tiny bit of know-how, you can change your MAC address. It's pretty trivial. Evil twin or man-in-the-middle attacks. This is what most people are going to think of, and was the second part of the airplane thing that is very relevant right now. So this would be when after you de-auth someone, you set up your own access point that is designed to basically say it's either a specific one or just to always reply, yes, I'm the access point you're looking for. Connect to me. And by trying to set yourself up to be the stronger signal in an area, so the better antenna, the better power source, the better setup you have, and the better you can position yourself between your target and the actual network that they're trying to connect to, the better off you're going to be. And the basic thing that everyone might think of is just listening to what they're doing. You can get access to all of their traffic that's going back and forth. You can see exactly what they're doing. You can try to pull out data. And that you can stay relatively passive. So if they don't realize they're not connected to the right network, you can probably get away with sitting in that middle spot for a long time. But if you wanted to be a little bit more aggressive with it, you could actually use a common tool like Burp Suite, or there's other tools you can set up for, or like Wi-Fi Pineapple to actually set up a fake landing page. Maybe you know that this person's going to try to log into the Azure portal. So you make your own fake version of the Azure portal, and when they try to make that connection to Azure, instead it pulls up your website, they plug in their credentials, you say, oops, sorry, wrong password, and then you send them to the actual Azure portal. And now you've got their creds sitting in a text file on your computer. Lots of different ways to use that maliciously. Bypassing segmentation. This was kind of an interesting area that it doesn't seem to have quite as many exploits for. Actually, shout out to, I believe it was Nerdwoman on the MISEC Discord who posted about AirSnitch. And this is a series of, they're not like cracking password type exploits, but they're a series of like configuration abuses that can be used in order to bypass the segmentation that someone might have set up. So getting past like from a guest network over to like a primary network. The first thing is using the group temporal keys. So I already mentioned temporal keys before. In a standard setup, especially with like WPA2, you are going to have a pairwise temporal key, which is for your single connections where you're just like you and the access point that you're connected to. But you'll also get a group temporal key, which will allow for multicasting purposes. And generally speaking, you can use the group temporal key for single connections, and it does not bulk. So if you have an access point that is set up to have both the guest network and the primary network, and you're trying to send a message to a device on the primary network, if you use the group temporal key, you might be able to bypass that network segmentation. Since along with that, layer 3 gateway bounces. So network segmentation actually happens at layer 2, the data layer. So if you are able to, let's see here. This was one thing that it got pretty complex. So trying to keep this relatively simple. How did I word that again? Sorry, looking at my notes. So it had to do with like blocking station-to-station frames and being able to forward traffic through the default gateway, because layer 3 specific protections need to be put in place in order to prevent like IP spoofing and other methods that were there that you could use in order to bypass that layer 2 protection. Along with that is just any sorts of various misconfigurations. If you've got devices that are multi-homed on multiple different Wi-Fi networks, you can sometimes abuse those, especially with like MAC spoofing or IP spoofing, in order to make them think that you are the device that can go across the network and get access to these other devices. That's where complexity is going to be the enemy of security very extremely. So keeping your networks as simple as you reasonably can is kind of your best defense, or making sure those are audited very thoroughly. Tools of the trade. Big one that a lot of people know is the Wi-Fi Pineapple. Makes things a million times easier than a lot of your free options, especially the man-in-the-middle attacks. Like it's, basically, as long as you set up your catch page, that's pretty much all you really need. At least that's the most technical part of what you need to do when setting up a Pineapple. It will automatically start, when you set it up, it'll automatically start listening for devices. It'll associate them with the SSIDs. You can do all your DAuth attacks. You can try to figure out some of the information about the devices, depending on like the specific version of the Pineapple you have and everything like that. They make these things so much easier. The main downside is that they're relatively expensive. They're going to set you back a few $100 at least, depending on the level you want. If you want to get like the really hardcore enterprise grade ones, I want to say those were like somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500. But that I would need to double check. It's been a long time since I've taken a glance at those ones. Aircrack NG. It's a suite of free tools that, well, it's directly on Kali Linux, if any of you have a VM with that set up. And you can download it. That's going to be able to do pretty much everything, but it is going to take a lot more manual work to get it set up correctly. And make sure that you're gathering the data. You have to do a lot more double checking in order to make sure that you're not messing with things that you don't want to mess with, where the Pineapple is a little bit more plug and play. Along with that is kind of the middle ground, Flipper Zero. Flipper itself doesn't have Wi-Fi access, but there are Wi-Fi dev boards. And there is already a tool set that you can download from like the main Flipper app that is Marauder, that has a lot of the tools used in these kinds of attacks. I have not played around with it. I don't have a dev board, a Wi-Fi dev board. I imagine that the man-in-the-middle stuff is probably going to be relatively rough, especially compared to a Pineapple, but it can probably do the vast majority of what you want to do for less than, well, somewhere around half the price of what you'd pay for a Pineapple. Learning while staying legal. This is some of the various places that you can go and things you can do in order to learn more about this stuff. So the big one is going to be the radio frequency hacking and the ham radio villages. You're going to see them at pretty much any really big enough cybersecurity conference. Great resources there. Always super friendly people. Great time to go and just talk to people. Learn a ton of stuff just by talking to people at cons. Honestly, if you're ever at a con and you know the talks are recorded, I would say do not bother going to the talks. Go talk to people, go do CTFs, go do anything other than go to the talks if they're recorded. Watch them later. Capture the flags. Not as common as your standard like break into the network or like hardware hacking, but wireless competitions are out there, as I mentioned, with like DEF CON's Fox Hunt. If you can find them, they are a great time and a great way to kind of cut your teeth, see what you've already learned, and meet people who do know what they're doing. They may not be willing to give you a ton of advice mid-competition, especially if they see you as another contestant, but especially if you get to make friends and talk to them after the fact, you can probably learn all sorts of cool stuff. Certifications. A lot of the big companies have either at least a part of their major certification, like the PNPT, when I took it a number of years ago, had a section on Wi-Fi hacking. It wasn't extremely robust, but it was a good jump-off point. The OffSec has their own dedicated wireless certification, and the other big players most likely are going to have something in that realm that you can do. Prices on that are going to vary a lot. So making sure you know the reputation of the place you're looking at is going to be big. And then the last thing I found is Black Hills Information Security has a free GitHub application called Wi-Fi Forge. It is a small Docker container that allows you to simulate a number of like basic Wi-Fi hacking techniques as like a very light training ground. I ran out of time when I found it that I had this week to really get to sink my teeth and kind of double check it. But as far as the basic setup went, it wasn't too bad. And just kind of poking at like their documentation, it did look like a pretty solid tool for learning like the basics of deauth, cracking hashes, and a few of the other things that I've talked about here today. The additional things, these are just some of the cool projects that I found. The Quad RF. I actually posted about this in MISEC's InfoSec channel a week or two ago. This is like a partially open source project, and I'm sure it's the type of thing that like the government has had for a million years, and they're just now getting to the point where it's commercially viable, where essentially what it is it's a radio antenna designed to hook up with your phone, so that way when you display your camera, it will actually show as like a colored overlay the various types of signals in your area. So it'd be great for like bug hunting. It would make these fox hunts a million times easier. And it just seemed like a really neat thing to play with. They're kind of in a Kickstarter phase, so buyer beware. I'm not backing them yet, but it is a project that I am going to be watching. It's a little bit more than I wanted to spend on something that I have no guarantee for. But we'll see where they're at in a year or two and what that thing looks like. The American Radio Relay League's radio orienteering. This is kind of out of scope because this is more of the ham-related stuff. This is where I'm getting into some of like that orienteering, fox hunting stuff. That looked interesting. I don't know if I'm going to actually commit to going out and trying to find these guys and see if there's any in our immediate area, but it seemed like the kind of thing that people in MISEC that at least some of us might be interested in doing. So I wanted to make sure that people were aware that it's a thing, especially as some MISEC people have talked about doing like a camping trip or something. An idea might be to try to find a way to implement some of that in whatever MISEC's Hacker Summer Camp actually looks like. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up is the Xschwartz Pineapple clone. This is an open source Pineapple tool that, shout out to Zach Attack on the MISEC Discord. He brought this to my attention like a year or so ago. And it's based on the Open WRT router program. You have to have a little bit of an older router. It's kind of an old project now. I think the last update was sometime during COVID. So you can probably still get some decent functionality out of it, since a lot of the Wi-Fi standards, as we were going through the years of that, they don't exactly change all that quickly. But you're going to have an older router. The one router that I already had on hand was not quite within their scope. There was some conflicting documentation on it, and they actually had buried the firmware that was meant for my particular model, and then I couldn't get it working, so I suspect they buried it for a reason. They just didn't exit from the list before they kind of abandoned the project. So something that I kind of want to play with more sometime in the future when I can find a cheap router, or maybe I'll just order some like $30 thing off the internet. But those were a few fun projects that might make good things to expand on, especially if someone wants to take the basics I have here and run with it for a future talk. With that, we're always looking for more presenters. So if anyone is interested in presenting in the future, please let myself, Weird Wired on Discord if you reach out to me that way, or Emma Scowie, who is Ed, my co-administrator for Southfield. Let either of us know. We're happy to help you get started, or if you've already got like something from start to finish, happy to help you get scheduled and find a time for that. So thank you, everyone. I'd like to open up the floor to any questions. So specifically for the audio, if I like talking a little bit more about multi-homing and how that sort of thing is done. So usually that's when you're going to be more of dealing with like specific routing rules, so much as having like a device that is officially connected to two separate Wi-Fi networks. So like I'm going to hazard a guess that you have some Ubiquiti equipment. I believe we've talked about that in the past for our question asker. You can set the rules on that to allow devices to chat with each other, and any solid enterprise grade stuff is going to allow you to kind of set that up so that way if you have a server on one network that you want to be able to talk to like a limited set of devices on another network, you can have it do that. And looking for devices that are making those sorts of connections. And that's where the recon is going to be more about seeing who is actually talking. Because when you collect that sort of information, you'll usually get like the MAC address, the IP, the SSID that it's connected to. And so if you see that like, oh, device A has been chatting on the internal network on your 1010 whatever, and then all of a sudden it's also chatting on 172.16. whatever, and then you see it's talking on 10 whatever again, you can go, oh, well, this device is clearly talking on multiple networks. Maybe if I steal its MAC address, I spoof that MAC address, I spoof my IP, and then I'm going to just kind of try to start sending out signals, see if anything replies. Yeah. Harry?
Yeah, so if you go a bit more into the
Aircraft or air snitch? Okay, air snitch. Air snitch gets pretty complex. There is a full white paper for it. I believe I included the white paper in my references here. Yeah. So yeah, fifth one from the bottom there. That will bring you a link to go into more in depth if you want like the ultra technical details of how they were doing a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
Wiggle reported that there were about 17% unknown networks that fit into any of the web and FBA categories were open.
Yeah.
Any idea what those are?
I have no clue, to be honest. My guess is it's shenanigans where it's somebody broadcasting on those networks that is not actually using Wi-Fi protocols, like on those bands. I'm imagining shenanigans. That would be my guess. But I can't say for sure. I'm sure it would be a very interesting topic to delve into.
Yeah, 17% seems like a lot for shenanigans.
Yeah. Bad connections, maybe, who knows?
I think a lot of that connections.
Probably. All right. Yeah, Harry?
just wanted to add, so another thing you could use is the Kali Net Hunter.
Yes, NetHunter would also be useful. I don't know if NetHunter has AirCrack on it, but I would imagine that it's very similar tools if it doesn't have the AirCrack suite directly on it. Any questions on the Discord? I mean, on the YouTube at all? I believe Giggs at least said that he was going to be watching tonight. Okay. George?
From
Yes.
Having attempts and maybe limit unsuccessful
Yes.
run-ins to help for the brute force?
It would definitely be possible to set up some sort of monitoring to order to track people trying to connect and try to prevent that. The trick of it is when they can just change their MAC address, you have no way of keeping track of them anymore. MAC address is effectively the physical address of the device, and since you can spoof that, all an attacker is going to do, if they are really that determined to get into your Wi-Fi, they're just going to switch their MAC address and they're going to keep hammering away. So your only other option at that point is shut the whole thing down. Move everybody to another Wi-Fi network, leave the one up, and just close it off. So they're basically hammering away at a dead subnet. That would be, if you were really that worried about somebody who's that determined to get in, that would probably be my first thought. Or try to use some of the fox hunting tricks to actually hunt the person down and do what you will at that point. Brad?
This might be a really big question, but is there always a physical length of space where that, attacker or somebody's sticking something out that there's a limit to how far they can be from these networks?
A limit as to the distance from the network. I'm sure there is a theoretical limit, but to my understanding, the strength of an attacker's antenna can make a huge difference. I believe it was a Darknet Diaries story. It was a relatively recent one where it was about the FBI trying to track down some big hackers in Romania. And one of the tricks that the attackers were using was they had a directional Wi-Fi antenna. And what they were doing is they would all gather together at one of the people's houses. And they would use this directional antenna to hit a random Wi-Fi across the city that they lived in. And so when the FBI agents were finally able to work with the Romanian police and actually try to hunt these people down, they ended up at a number of just random people's houses. And they just couldn't do anything. And it took them quite a long time to actually get these hackers because they knew who they were relatively early on, but finding that hard evidence required, especially when you're dealing with international crime, to prosecute them properly, that took an eternity. That was a great Darknet Diaries episode. I don't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. I feel like it was a month or two ago. But if you go through if you look through the descriptions, I'm sure you'll find it quick enough. All right, George?
If this is too early for this question, I'm sorry. As quantum computing capabilities are coming on the horizon, do you hear any stories about having utilized for brute force attacks?
I'm not aware of any quantum brute forcing attacks specifically with Wi-Fi. I know there's been some very in-lab attempts to break things, and depending on who you talk to, it's either a significant leap forward in quantum computing, or it was a very pre-set up, they knew exactly what they were attacking sort of scenario. Is a very limited scope use case, and it really doesn't show anything. So it's kind of hard to say. From my conversations with people at conferences, I think quantum in general looks like it's going to be very promising, but I also think it's going to be the next major grift. Once the AI thing stops being as beneficial for grifters specifically, quantum's going to be the next overhyped thing. That's my prediction. That who knows whether it's going to be true or not, but that's kind of what I see happening next. Asgard?
So, other than
Certificate-based should prevent a lot of like the authentication type stuff. They're still going to be able to listen over the air, so depending on how it's set up, you're probably, yeah, they won't be able to connect directly. They'll likely be able to do a lot of the recon stuff, but they'll probably be able to DOS you, and that's about it. Unless they can get on somebody's device through like a man-in-the-middle attack, where you're kind of going, yeah, exactly. That's where you're kind of out of the network and you're just feigning being, and regardless of whatever somebody says to you, if they're like, oh, are you my network? You just say yes. And so then they connect and they get at least that half of the handshake or the certificate, whatever. You can only do so much with that probably, but it would give them at least that person's connection. And they wouldn't be able to access any internal resources, but they would be able to access the web. So depending on what the person's job is and what they do, you might be able to keep that connection going for quite a long time. It would definitely slow down an attacker a lot. All right. Well, I believe that's going to wrap it up here. Thank you, everyone, again, for coming out tonight. Thanks again to Brown Iron Brewhouse for hosting us. And I hope everyone has a great evening. Our next meeting is going to be a social. Most likely, it's going to be at One-Eyed Betty's, since that's our most common meetup place. But every once in a while, we do like to shake it up, so keep an eye on the Discord. That will be the 4th Thursday of the month, roughly same time frame. Usually, we show up there about 5:30, and we stay until people decide to head out. And that date will be the 27th. So, all right, I hope to see everyone there, and otherwise, hope you all have a great evening.